Kurt Busch could be making a return to NASCAR. Stewart-Haas Racing might be leaving Ford at the end of 2024. Honda could still be joining NASCAR as early as 2026. And NASCAR could be headed to Dodger Stadium as early as 2025. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a ton of paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Timmy Hill's 2024 Wills Automotive scheme that we'll see at COTA. This is alright paint scheme in my opinion, kind of bare. I love the red on it, and I do like they got Wills Automotive on the right side. But other than that, there's not a ton going on with this paint scheme. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Seven Parsons' 2024 Pop scheme that we'll see in 2 races in 2024 at Bristol and I believe at Texas as well. This is a kind of a blank paint scheme. Cool to see that Seven Parsons is going to run a few more races this year, help the entry list a little bit more, but it's kind of a little bit bare in my opinion. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Blaney's 2024 Advanced Auto Parts scheme that we'll see this weekend at Phoenix. This scheme's alright in my opinion, kind of similar to the last couple schemes. It's not absolutely amazing, it's not bad. I think it's just decent. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Harrison Burton's 2024 driver scheme that we'll see this weekend at Phoenix and during the Brickyard 400. Not much to say other than it's okay in my opinion. It's decent for sure. I do like the colors on it, but it's not really popping and it's not fantastic. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Eric Jones' 2024 Family Dollar scheme that we'll see this weekend at Phoenix. I love this paint scheme. Once again, kind of similar to John Hunter Nemechek's scheme. It gives me those Juan Pablo Montoya vibes. It's very, very solid. I think it does look pretty good, and I'm looking forward to see it on the racetrack this weekend at Phoenix. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Phoenix purse money. So every time we have a NASCAR Cup, Xfinity Series, and Truck Series race, Bob Pockus puts out the purse money. And according to Bob, for the Cup race is $70,806,252. For the Xfinity Series race, it's $1,448,204. I think that's a little bit of an increase from last year's purse money. Obviously, with more TV money coming with the next TV deal, you're going to be seeing more money coming in for these races. So honestly, that is some pretty solid money for this weekend, and the teams are getting a little more money, especially for Xfinity, which is going to get about $1.5 million. That is some pretty good money for this weekend. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Xfinity Series race at Martinsville. As they have a title sponsor for the event, it's going to be called the Dude Wipes 250. Bob Pockus made a little bit of joke saying the Dude Wipes 222, but no, it's now going to be called the Dude Wipes 250. Honestly, a really solid name, all things considered. They've got a big affiliation with Anthony Alfredo. Cool to see the Dude Wipes is going to be sponsoring the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Martinsville. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Darlington Xfinity Series race as their title sponsor has also been revealed. It's going to be called the Crown Royal Purple Bag Project 200. I believe this is a really, really good project that's been going on. Obviously, Crown Royal's had a big association with the sport in recent years. So it's cool to see that they are going to be sponsoring the Xfinity Series event at Darlington. I think the first time they sponsored the Xfinity Series race at Darlington in some capacity in about 10 years. So good to see that Crown Royal is going to be back sponsoring this event in 2024. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Nashville Truck Race. As it was announced yesterday that the Nashville Truck Race will be on FS2 on June 28th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. This had not been announced at a time when this race is going to be. I think originally might have been for 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but they're moving the race a little bit earlier to 7 p.m. Central Standard Time on Friday night. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, it is going to be on FS2, which I think is a little sucks because in my personal opinion, I think the race should be on FS1, but I guess there's something scheduled on that night. That's why they had to move the race to FS2. A little disappointed on that front, but not surprised and shocked to see that the race is going to be on FS2 this year. A little disappointed about it, though. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Michigan Speedway. As it was announced a couple days ago on Wednesday that Michigan Speedway's infield camping has officially sold out. Last year, I think the infield camping sold out either in May or June, so the fact that it's already sold out in early March, I think is absolutely phenomenal to see. And if they're able to sell out the grandstands, I think it could be one of the largest crowds we've seen since Dale Jr. had won his race back in 2012 when he got his first win in 4 years. We're seeing NASCAR continue to grow back a little bit, and we've seen attendance grow at a lot of these racetracks as people are going out to these races a lot more. So in general, I think it's really awesome and fantastic to see, and nonetheless very happy and glad to see that the infield camping has officially sold out for the race at Michigan. I think it's really exciting and great stuff overall. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about IndyCar. As it was announced yesterday that IndyCar has formed a content alliance with Dirty Mo Media. I believe throughout the season, Connor Daly and I think Chase Holden's Street Pod or whatever is IndyCar Street Pod that they have, which I've watched many times, will be part of sponsorship for if I'm not mistaken. This is absolutely huge. Obviously, Dirty Mo Media has been growing their presence in the motorsports world. It's Dale Jr.'s company. Obviously, Dale Jr. has been involved in some sort of capacity in recent years and recent seasons with working with the sport. And in general, I think it's really phenomenal that IndyCar will be working with Dirty Mo Media to showcase their stuff throughout the season. Really phenomenal and awesome stuff overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jesse Love. As it was announced yesterday early afternoon that Jesse Love will be running the Mazda MX-5 Cup Series race at Sebring in a couple of weeks. He'll be going up against drivers like Connor Lich and will be driving for Hendricks Motorsports. That's not Hendrick Motorsports, it's a different organization, just so everybody knows. Jesse Love, it's really cool that he is going to be venturing out and running in different forms of racing. I think he's someone who's really got a ton of potential, and I think going out and running a series like Mazda MX-5 up against drivers like Connor Lich and other drivers in the series, I think it's going to be fun to watch. Because I think those two, because they're really good friends, by the way, I think he's got a really good opportunity and a really strong chance to go out there and compete for the win in the event. We'll see what happens to see how good he performs, but I'm really happy to see that he'll be racing in the Mazda MX-5 race at Sebring. Really awesome and great stuff overall, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Vargas. As it was announced on Wednesday early morning that Ryan Vargas will be running full-time in the NASCAR Euro Series, driving for 3F Racing. Along with this week, competing for Jordan Anderson Racing, having Allergus Security as a sponsor for this weekend, Ryan Vargas, like I said, will be competing full-time in the Euro Series. Last year, Ryan Vargas competed part-time with 3F Racing, which they have some plans to eventually go Cup Series racing. There was some talk they could have been racing this year at this point, but right now it's still to be determined on what they're going to be doing here in NASCAR in 2024. Ryan Vargas, I think, is a very solid race car driver. He's done the best in some pretty good equipment. He hasn't really had amazing equipment, but we saw what he did last year with 3F Racing, got a couple top 10 finishes. I don't expect him to win the championship with 3F Racing, but just see that team is actually going to be competing full-time in the NASCAR Euro Series, I think is pretty damn cool. So I'm really excited about this for him. Glad to see he's getting the chance and opportunity to compete full-time in the NASCAR Euro Series in the 2024 season. And I really hope he can make the best of it because I think he is a really talented driver. And it's just cool and awesome to see they'll be competing full-time with 3F Racing in the 2024 season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. As it was announced yesterday and reported by Bob Pockers that Kyle Busch is going to have a ton of crew changes for this weekend. I think the tire changers, I think like everybody on Kyle Busch's pit crew has now been changed for 2024. And we're not even 4 weeks through the season up to this point. We already knew that Kyle Busch had a new tire changer after I think it was at Atlanta. They made a tire changer change for Vegas. And now they've got everybody changing once again. Obviously, one of Kyle Busch's biggest issues so far this year has been on pit road, which is why all these crew changes are taking place in the first place. And that's why I think they made these decisions and made these moves to go ahead and make these crew changes for Kyle Busch to try to help him out a lot on pit road. I think every race at some point outside of Atlanta, every race he's either had speeding penalties or pitting outside of the box, which the pit crew members could have done a better job. Yes, Kyle Busch could have done a better job getting the pit road, but Kyle Busch also is not 1,000% at fault for that. That's on the team to make sure he doesn't have issues. We'll see if these crew changes can help Kyle Busch out because they want to make sure Kyle Busch is a championship threat because I do think he has a chance to win the championship this year, but they've got to do better on pit road if they are going to be competing for the championship in 2024. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Oli Baron. As it was announced earlier this morning that Oli Baron will be making his F1 debut tomorrow at Jeddah for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. The reason is because unfortunately Carlos Sainz has been diagnosed with appendicitis and will be required to have surgery. And of course, Oli Baron will be driving for Ferrari. This is an absolutely amazing and great opportunity. After he won the pole for the F2 race, which will be going on here probably by the time you're watching this video and probably will be completed, Oli Baron has been the reserve driver and I believe a test driver for Ferrari for the last couple of years. And to see that he is getting the chance and opportunity to compete with this team in 2024 for the first time ever, this is going to be an amazing and a great opportunity for him. I believe he also is going to be the first British driver to compete with Ferrari since Nigel Mansell back in the early to mid 1990s. So I think that Oli Baron here has a decent chance to contend for a podium. I don't think he's going to win the race because I think, let's be honest, I think that Max Verstappen is probably going to win the race tomorrow, probably by a wide margin, even though I think Sergio, because of how good he's been on street course in the past, he could have a good run. I think it's going to be really tough to beat Max Verstappen. But still, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for him and glad to see that he will be making his F1 debut this weekend at Jeddah. But I'm also wishing the best in a speedy recovery for Carlos Sainz, and hopefully he'll get back to the racetrack here relatively soon. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ed Jones. As it was announced Wednesday early afternoon that Ed Jones will be driving a 24 car for Sam Hunt Racing for 3 races in 2024. He'll be racing at Circuit Americas in a week or two. Then he's going to race at Portland in June when the NASCAR Cup and Truck Series are at Gateway. And then he'll race at Sonoma. Ed Jones, for those who don't know, is a former IndyCar driver who competed for teams like Chip Ganassi Racing and Dillon Racing as well. To maybe a little bit to little to no success, though he did have some solid runs in IndyCar. He's also been competing in the GT Series in recent years and also did make his Truck Series debut in the 20 truck for Young's Racing, but only made it through the first corner. Ed Jones does have some experience at this racetrack, I think, from IndyCar at COTA, so I think he does have a decent chance to compete. I don't expect him to go out and win the race by any stretch of imagination, because this is going to be the first time that the 24 car has been on the racetrack, and they are going to have a good run to make sure they're not in danger spot when it comes to owners' points. But we know that the 24 team has shown some decent pace in the past. We saw Sage Karaman, the 24 car last year, do extremely well. That's why he's getting a chance with this team at COTA once again. I think that Ed Jones does have a decent chance and opportunity to go out there and compete. Not for a win or a victory, but at least a solid run with the organization. So we'll see what happens to Ed Jones, but glad to see that he's getting the chance and opportunity to drive with this team in 2024, which could lead maybe to eventually a full-time run with the organization. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brody Kostecki. As it was reported, I think, by JSK.com and Auto Week, that as of right now, Brody Kostecki has no races that are currently planned at Richard Childress Racing. However, Richard Childress is still interested in fielding Brody Kostecki in a car. It was announced at the end of last year's season, or near the end of 2023, that Brody Kostecki had been intending to run some NASCAR Cup Series races with RCR in 2024. However, we all know what's been going on with a contact with RCR, and that is Erebus Racing. If you've been paying attention to the Erebus Racing saga, this team has been under a lot of fire because they basically kicked Brody Kostecki out of the seat for, I think, Todd Hazelwood, if I'm not mistaken, and he's basically been out of the team for the last 2 weeks, and he doesn't have a ride currently at the moment. But some do believe that Brody Kostecki is going to go stateswide and going to come over here and race in NASCAR, which I think would be really cool to see. I really would love to see Brody Kostecki come over here and race in NASCAR. He did make a run last year at Indy and had basically no simulator time and finished 21st and had a top 10 car at times in practice. So I would imagine if Brody Kostecki comes over here, I think he would be a solid and a pretty good driver. So we'll see what happens when it comes to Brody Kostecki and if he does get a chance and opportunity to race here. I still think there's a chance he runs at COTA, but we'll have to wait and see if he does in fact get to race at COTA at some point in 2024, because I think it'd be really fun to have him race in the sport, because I think he would be a pretty solid and pretty competitive driver in the sport if he got the chance and opportunity to race in NASCAR once again. I hope he does get a chance to race in NASCAR once again, maybe with RCR if they do give him the chance and opportunity to race in this sport. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Joey Logano. Now, Joey Logano was on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio, I believe it was on Wednesday, and basically spoke about the business model that is currently going on in NASCAR. He says the business model in the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series really is not that great currently at the moment. He says that he doesn't have to pay to drive a NASCAR Cup Series stock car. He says he has to pay to race in the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series. This obviously is one of the biggest reasons why we've seen a lot of paid drivers come in recent years and recent seasons. But he basically says something that's a big problem. If a two-time NASCAR Cup Series champion can't get any race car for free or get paid, he has to pay himself and the team loses money. How can a young and inspiring driver who has talent like a Brett Moffitt or even like a driver like Matt DiBenedetto, how could someone like one of those guys be able to get behind the wheel of a seat or an aspiring driver move up to the upper series? That is why it's so difficult currently at the moment for young drivers to move up. That's why they have to use drivers and go for drivers that bring sponsorship and money. They may not be the best. Drivers like a Joe Graf Jr. perhaps, someone like a Haley Deegan, even though I think she is a talented driver, they're going to go for those drivers who bring the sponsorship and they bring the money to the table, and they're not losing money out on them. That's why Joey Logano, which I think is more of an issue with Ford than anything else, because Ford has a big issue when it comes to paying their drivers, it seems like in recent years and recent seasons. I think that's a big thing to look at as well, is it might be a Ford issue more than anything else. I really hope with the money that's going to be coming in for Xfinity in the future, I hope it basically could mean that we could see more talented drivers get a chance and opportunity, because I think it would be really good for the sport if those drivers that are talented could get a chance and could get an opportunity. We'll see what happens down the road, and we'll see how things work for the future when it comes to this business model. I do agree there needs to be changes for the business model, but I don't know right now if those changes are going to be coming overall, to be perfectly honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Texas Motor Speedway. Now, this is a story that I was originally going to cover on Wednesday, but I didn't get a chance and opportunity to cover. So there was a report that came out, I think it was from NASCAR Nostalgia, and I want to give a shout out to CR1 Chris on Twitter for basically putting this tweet out as well, indicating that it sounds like that Texas Motor Speedway, even though there were kind of rumors from an Adam Slurn page, it sounds like maybe some of these rumors could actually be a little true. It sounds like there's a potential that Texas Motor Speedway could be reconfigured, not turned into a super speedway, but could be reconfigured into a 1.25 mile racetrack, cutting it down from 1.5 miles down to 1.25 mile racetrack, basically the size of Worldwide Technology Raceway, also known as Gateway. This is very interesting because we've heard some rumors in regards to Texas Motor Speedway in recent years. We had heard that maybe Texas Motor Speedway could be reconfigured into a short track, maybe like a 1/2 mile short track like they're doing with Auto Club. There's been rumors they could reconfigure it into a 1.5 mile super speedway, kind of similar to what they did to Atlanta Motor Speedway, and they also could have reconfigured it into a different type of track as well. Because everyone in the industry is expecting that Texas Motor Speedway, not too far down the road, is going to have some pretty major and huge changes coming. Because let's be honest with ourselves. While I don't think the Cup Series race the last time we ran there was actually that bad, I think they definitely do need to make at least some changes to the racetrack to make the racing product at least a little bit better. Because let's be honest, like I said, the racing at Texas Motor Speedway, since they reconfigured the track, has been very underwhelming. And it's a shame because if we had the original configuration before they changed it, I think the racing would absolutely be awesome and very, very great and amazing right now. So we'll see what happens when it comes to Texas, because this is just a rumor currently at the moment and there's nothing official and confirmed from any sources at this point. But it does sound like that there could be at least some potential changes coming to the track, which I absolutely would be for because I think it'd be really good for the sport. And I think if Texas turned into 1.25 mile racetrack, I think it would be a great racetrack when it comes to the racing product on the racetrack. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Dillon. Now, this is not a story that I've seen many big reporters talk about, but I've seen a few videos on YouTube talking about this. So there's been a lot of rumors surrounding Austin Dillon and a potential of him retiring at the end of 2024. Now, why are these rumors circulating? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, because Kyle Busch has been outperforming his equipment and doing an amazing job at Richard Childress Racing since getting there last year, scoring 3 wins in the last 35 or 40 races that he's been at the team. Austin Dillon, on the other hand, struggled last year in 2023, and 2024 has not gotten off to the right footing, and it's been a little struggle for him so far this season. And 2, Austin Dillon is basically, a lot of people are promoting him eventually to an executive role. There's a lot of reasons why there, because Austin Dillon is son of Mike Dillon, who's a higher-up executive at the team as well. And, of course, he's a grandson of Richard Childress, who got out of the seat about the same age Austin Dillon is. Now, Austin Dillon is currently 34 years old, which is close to the same age that Mike Dillon was when he retired the sport, though sadly the reason that Mike Dillon retired was because he basically got involved in a wreck in an incident back in 2001 and then took an executive role, became a spotter for Clint Boyer, and then eventually took a higher-up executive role at the organization of RCR. Let's be honest here. Do I think that Austin Dillon is going to retire at the end of 2024? No. I think it's very unlikely he retires at the end of this year. But I think next year is actually going to be his last year, and here's why. Austin Dillon has one more year in the 21 car. I think he is going to be a replacement for Austin Dillon. I know people mentioned Jesse Love, and Jesse Love would be a really good opportunity driver to put behind the wheel of the seat, but as of right now, I think that Austin Hill, because of his experience, I think he's going to be the guy that's going to be replacing Austin Dillon at the end of 2025 and taking over in the 2026 season. I think that's what's going to happen. I think Austin Dillon will go another year and then retire in 2026. Because I think he's going to go into an executive role. Because Austin Dillon, I think, is not going to be around much longer. He's a solid driver. He's won some racing cup. I don't think he's a Hall of Famer by any stretch of imagination, but I do believe that 2025 is going to be the last year. I don't think he retires in 2024. I think he actually retires at the end of the 2025 season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Trion Garage. Now, yesterday in the middle to late afternoon, Trion Garage on their Twitter page put out a little bit of teaser on a potential announcement that could be coming on a driver relatively soon. And once they put out this teaser, there was a lot of speculation on some potential drivers that could get behind the wheel. So let's discuss this. Obviously, the one truck is the truck we're talking about here because there are some races that are still available for the one truck. We know the Williams Swash is going to be behind the wheel of that one truck, I believe, at Bristol next week. We also have seen Christopher Bell behind the wheel. We've also seen other drivers get a chance and opportunity. I know John Hunter's name has been kind of indicated as a potential driver as well. But let's talk about potential candidates. Who could be a driver that could drive the one for Trion? Well, maybe Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace talked, I think it was David Gill and son Todd on one of those spaces on Twitter, and I know that Bubba would like to probably run a truck again, but it's not Bubba who I think is going to be the driver who is going to be behind the wheel. John Hunter Nemechek could be a driver who gets behind the wheel of the one truck this year. It certainly is possible, but there's been nothing announced yet at this point. I've seen people mention when there's speculation maybe Carl Edwards, but Carl Edwards I don't think is coming out of retirement, at least as now, though it would be cool to see Carl come out of retirement and race once again, especially in the truck series, but I don't know if he's going to come out of retirement. I've seen some people even speculating Kurt Busch as a potential possibility, considering Kurt Busch has kind of indicated recently maybe he's interested in maybe making a return, so maybe Kurt Busch could be this driver. It did look like Kurt Busch from a photo, but I'm not entirely sure. Maybe Travis Pastrana could be the said driver. Maybe Matt DiBenedetto. Those could certainly be drivers as well. But a name that I was thinking about a second ago is Butterbean Queen, also known as Brendan Queen. Basically, Private Porno put out a little bit of a tweet basically showing Butterbean, because the first tweet they've had in a few months, by the way, indicating Butterbean Queen. Brendan Queen's a legend of the late model scene. I think Martinsville might be available for a Trion truck to run, so I could certainly see this being Butterbean Queen as well. Brendan Queen is a legend of the late model scene. He's won some big late model races, currently competes in the Cars Late Model Tour, so this currently could be Brendan Queen as a potential possibility. It's going to be interesting to see who the driver they end up choosing is, and we'll probably not know not too far down the road who'll be behind the wheel of this seat in 2024. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Shane Van Gisbergen. As it was announced earlier this week that Shane Van Gisbergen is going to run the Cup Series race at Daytona International Speedway, driving the number 16 car with Safety Culture as the sponsor. It was also confirmed during that same announcement that Safety Culture is going to sponsor in 3 NASCAR Xfinity Series races, tomorrow's race at Phoenix, then Michigan, and I believe there's another race they are going to sponsor him as well. I think it's Kansas was the other race that is going to sponsor Shane Van Gisbergen as well. SVG is looking to probably run full-time in the Cup Series next year in 2025, but the fact that he's been expanding his schedule from 7 to 8 NASCAR Cup Series races, I think is absolutely huge. Because like I said, I think Shane Van Gisbergen wants to go full-time Cup Series racing here relatively soon. And obviously he's making his NASCAR Cup Series debut in about a week or two, but I would imagine that there are some other races that they are planning to run him, because we don't know who's behind the wheel of the 16 car Bristol at this point. We haven't had an official announcement who's behind the wheel of that 16 car. Maybe it's going to be Shane Van Gisbergen, who knows. But SVG's schedule keeps getting expanded because he goes from 7 to 8 races. I think SVG wants to run as many races as possible, because he mentioned this to Kevin Harvick that he only had 10 races planned for Xfinity this year and 3 Cup races planned. But now he's been expanding his schedule, it seems like, on a week-by-week basis. We know there might be some truck races coming down the road, perhaps, because he originally had plans to run some truck races. There could be some other ARCA race he runs at some point as well. But I think the fact he's going out there and wanting to learn and get more experience, especially on super speedway tracks, where I think he did solid at Atlanta, where he finished in 3rd. I know Atlanta's different than Daytona, but still going out there and learning and get experience in the NASCAR Cup Series, I think is absolutely phenomenal. And I'm excited to see that he's going to be back behind the wheel of another racing cup. And I wouldn't be surprised or shocked if there's more races announced for him. I think he could run as many as 9 to 12 races by the end of the year, which I think his schedule is getting more and more expanded, especially bring sponsorship funding to the table. I think that's going to give him a chance and an opportunity to get behind the wheel. So we'll see what happens, but it's cool to see that Shane Van Gisbergen is going to be expanding his NASCAR Cup Series schedule for the 2024 season. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Dodger Stadium. Now, there was a lot of talk and chatter yesterday surrounding Dodger Stadium and NASCAR. According to Adam Stern, NASCAR has held discussions about a possible race at the Dodgers' historic Dodger Stadium in the coming years, per sources. Now, it does not directly mention what year exactly that they'd be racing at Dodger Stadium. Some think it could be as early as 2025, because remember when it was announced that the Los Angeles Coliseum was going to be coming around in 2025. They basically, 21 or 22, I should say, the reports all the way back in 2021, they were planning to do this for the 2022 season, and they eventually went there. I think the reason that they're talking about going to Dodger Stadium maybe as early as next year, though, is because of the fact that you look at what's going on with the LA Coliseum. A lot of people do believe that, well, yes, there might be some talks to stay in the Southern California area and go to the LA Coliseum. It's no secret that I think some officials are thinking that they don't want to be back in the LA Coliseum once again. They feel like it's kind of run its course, especially with ticket sales being down, though there were extraordinary circumstances for those ticket sales being down this year. I think a lot of people do want to move on from racing at that racetrack, and they want to stay in the LA market, because Auto Club, we all know for a fact, is not going to be ready for 2025. The earliest it could be ready for is 2026, but there's been no official indication or word if it's even going to be ready for the 2026 season. So we're still potentially waiting a few more years for it to be at least ready. We could also be waiting until 2027 for that to happen. And we all know the Southern California market is one of the biggest markets when it comes to TV networks and TV partners. It's one of the biggest when it comes to ratings, among other things, and people tuning in. Even though like Greenville and other areas tend to get bigger numbers, it's because they're smaller markets compared to Los Angeles, which is a much bigger market for NASCAR. That's why they're trying to stay in the area. Now, obviously, how would the track work? Would it be inside the track, or would it be outside like in the parking lot? Because I've seen some people, I saw Breakard's video talking about this, and he mentioned a couple different types of tracks. Basically, maybe like a street course could be a potential possibility. Maybe a track inside the stadium, like a triangle is what could be something they do. Kind of, there was a track, I think, like Levi Strauss, something like that's kind of similar, kind of like in a sense like Nazareth maybe. Could be track similar to the way that track is laid out. I think that would be really cool, by the way, if they had like a triangle track, kind of like how Pocono is. I think that'd be really cool. But the fact that they are talking to officials at Dodger Stadium tells me that there's a lot of truth to this rumor, and I think there's a really good chance and possibility that we are going to be racing in Dodger Stadium as early as next year. But I think if they don't go to Dodger Stadium in 25, I think it'll be 2026, because they got to do it early in the year. They can't do it late in the year because you've got the MLB, because the early, you either have to do it like at the end of the year, which I don't think is going to happen, or you have to do it at the beginning of the year in like the first, second week, or do it as the Clash, because the MLB season kicks off in April. You can't have the season late. And I know NASCAR, like I said, they want to stay in the Southern California market. But the fact that they are talking about going to Dodger Stadium, it'd be really cool to see a race at Dodger Stadium. The question would be, would it be inside the track or not? That's something to be determined and watch for as time goes on. But it sounds like NASCAR is having true conversations about racing inside of Dodger Stadium in 2025, or maybe as early as 2026. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Honda. Now, we have talked about Honda quite a bit on this channel over the course of the last couple of weeks because there's been a lot of talks and chatter surrounding Honda potentially joining NASCAR. Now, we've had talks of Honda joining NASCAR since all the way back in the year 2019, or really back in the mid-2000s, there was talks about Honda coming in when Toyota joined in. But there's been a lot of substantial evidence to show that Honda is actually in serious talks. Go back a few months ago when basically I think the guy who runs Honda HPD, Chuck Schulte, when the issues with the hybrid system were coming out with IndyCar, basically he said that if they don't get the hybrid situation figured out, they could leave IndyCar at the end of the 2026 season and join NASCAR and also focus on their Formula One program with Aston Martin, because they're going to be working with Aston Martin in the not-so-distant future in 2026. Now, it does, and it kind of report Marshall Pruitt that if you're a fan of Honda, if you're a fan of NASCAR, you're barely going to be excited about the future. Now, it does need to be noted that it sounds like it will not be for 2025 unless it's been kept under wraps and secrets, which with how the industry works, it's very hard to keep things under wraps and under secrets. It sounds like that the earliest we could see Honda join the sport is 2026. According to Brian Murphy, who works at RFK Racing, the approval process has to be done for the bodies, has to be done by September 1st of every year. So if a body wanted to be approved for the 2026 season, it would have to be done by September 1st of this year. So we technically have a little under 6 months for that body to be officially and ready to go and get approved. But it won't be likely ready for 2025. But the earliest they could join is 2026. Now, do I think that Honda is going to join the sport? Yes, absolutely. But let's talk about some teams that could join NASCAR or could join Honda as early as 2026. Some are going to mention Stewart-Haas Racing. I don't think SHR is going to join in 2025 if they are, because we know the SHR, and we'll talk about them here in a little bit, but it's no secret that SHR more than likely is going to be leaving Ford at the end of this year. Though, I don't think that they're going to go to Honda as of yet. I think they're going to wait out a little bit to potentially switch over. There's another team to think about, Aspire Motorsports, and I think Spire is one of the more likely organizations. Spire Motorsports, I think about Andretti. Andretti's got a big investment in Spire because Downtowns, who is basically the co-owner of Andretti, is also invested with Gamebridge in Group 1001, and they've got invested in Andretti. So I would imagine that he probably is looking at switching over, and because Andretti's had such a big affiliation, there's no secret that Michael Andretti's interested in bringing his ownership into NASCAR, that could be a team that could switch over. Then you think about Trackhouse Racing. Trackhouse Racing, a team that could be to watch for 100% because Trackhouse Racing, their team has made some massive and bold moves in recent years and recent seasons. And they're not going to be a top-tier team at Chevrolet. We're not going to be the top dog. Hendrick is always going to be the top dog. But if they want to become the top dog of their manufacturer, Honda would be the way to go. But I don't know if they're going to switch. Then you think about Kaulig Racing. Kaulig Racing has been falling off a little bit in recent years, especially their Xfinity Series program. I would not be surprised if they're a team that does switch to Honda as early as the 2026 season. I've seen some people mention Rico Racing, and that could be an option as well. And then I've seen even mentions of Chip Ganassi Racing. It's no secret that Chip Ganassi has had a little bit of interest in wanting to come back to the sport back about a year ago. I know he hasn't really been any updates on that, but he said on the Dale Jr. Dallin when we were talking about Junior Motorsports potentially joining the Cup Series again, basically Chip Ganassi said he's interested and bringing the team back. So certainly we could see a team like Chip Ganassi Racing make a return over there. That certainly is an option and certainly is a possibility. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And again, I think they are going to join NASCAR again, but I believe the earliest we could see Honda join is the 2026 season. And you're going to have a car not just for the Cup Series. We're going to have the car for the secondary series, which probably won't be called the Xfinity Series, and you're going to have a car for the Truck Series as well. You're going to have cars for all three of these series that are going to be ready to go so that the sport can be in a good position overall, in my opinion. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens and how things work out for the sport in a nutshell when it comes to Honda. But like I said, I do believe that Honda is going to make the jump over to NASCAR, and I don't think it's going to be 2025, though. I think the earliest Honda could make the jump into the sport is the 2026 NASCAR season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Stewart-Haas Racing. Now, there's been a lot of talk and chatter surrounding Stewart-Haas Racing over the course of the last couple of weeks. The reason there's been a lot of talk about Stewart-Haas Racing is because it sounds like the Stewart-Haas Racing is expected to leave Ford, and there's been a lot of indications and rumblings that Stewart-Haas Racing could be leaving Ford at the end of the 2024 season and switching to a new manufacturer in 2025. Stewart-Haas Racing has been with Ford since 2017 season. They had a lot of success right from the get-go in 2017. And then 2018 was arguably the best season that they had with Ford, where they won, I think, like double-digit races that year. Eric Almirola got a win that year. Clint Bowyer won 2 races. Kurt Busch got a win. And Kevin Harvick won 8 races during that season. But since then, it's been a little bit of a downhill spiral for the team. 2019 had a little bit of a downhill performance. They dropped off a little bit. They lost Kurt Busch during that time. He went over to Chip Ganassi Racing. They brought Daniel Suarez in. Daniel Suarez missed the playoffs, but the other 3 drivers, Clint Bowyer, Kevin Harvick, and Eric Almirola, made it. Then in 2020, Kevin Harvick won 9 races, and the rest of the organization was pretty good that year. But then 2021 is where we saw a little bit of decline, and they've been declining on a year-by-year basis. And remember, it was announced recently that basically Front Row Motorsports is becoming a Tier 1 organization inside the Ford camp starting in 2025. They're going to 24, and they're working with Team Penske in a really big way. And Mark Rushbrook was talking to Daytona what's going on with SHR, and they indicated no comment, basically indicating that SHR is going to leave Ford. Look, I think SHR has dropped from being the number 1 team at Ford, which they really haven't been the number 1 team. It's been Penske for years, but they were ahead of teams like RFK and Front Row years ago. But now they're behind those 2 organizations. Yes, I know Noah Gragson had a fantastic performance at Vegas last week, and Chase Briscoe showed some speed. But I believe that SHR, because of the indications, I think they are leaving Ford. Now, what manufacturers could Stewart-Haas Racing go to in 2025? Well, the first team they could leave, they could stay with Ford perhaps, but the first manufacturer they could go to is Chevrolet. SHR worked with Chevy from 2009 up until the end of the 2016 season, and they had a lot of success during that time. They won a lot of races with Tony Stewart and Kevin Harvick, and Ryan Newman got some wins for the team, and even some other drivers had chances to win. And Kurt Busch won a couple races with the team. And you think about it as well, they won championships with Chevrolet. They won in 2011 the championship with Tony Stewart, and they won the championship with Kevin Harvick in 2014. So certainly, Stewart-Haas Racing definitely could go back to Chevrolet. Would they be the top dog at Chevy like they were? No, I don't think they would be a top dog at Chevy. I think they probably would be in the second tier. They probably would be around the tier where maybe Spire is and maybe some other organizations at the Chevrolet group. But they're not going to be a top dog team. So if they go back to Chevrolet, they could struggle a little bit, and they may be as bad as they are right now with Ford, but I think they may have a little bit of success. They also could potentially switch over to Toyota. I had heard a little bit of report, and there was a report that was put on Facebook about a week or 2 ago, maybe showing that they've been talking to Toyota, and there was maybe a post that was deleted that indicated they've been talking to Toyota. So Stewart-Haas Racing could absolutely go to Toyota for sure. But the problem is I don't know if they would be a top team at Toyota, because Toyota has 3 key partner teams. 2311 Racing with Bubba Wallace and Tyler Reddick, and maybe even Kurt Busch perhaps. We'll talk about in a little bit as well. Michael Jordan, those guys, and Corey Heim. Legacy Motor Club with Eric Jones, John Machek, and Jimmy Johnson, even Corey Heim. And then you have Joe Gibbs Racing with Christopher Bell, Ty Gibbs, Denny Hamlin, and Mauro Truex Jr. You've got 3 key partner teams. So while I think they probably have talked to them, they probably would be a secondary team. And then you think about the Honda rumors. Again, I don't think they're immediately going to go to Honda, but they could. It certainly is an option, a possibility. If they wanted to be a top team once again, I think going to Honda would not be a bad move. But you look at SHR and some of the things that have been going on with that team. They had opportunities to pick up really great drivers. And we know that Tony Stewart's been frustrated with Ford. He had opportunities to pick up really great drivers. He could have picked up someone like a Kyle Larson, a Kyle Busch, maybe even Zane Smith. Michael McDowell was a potential possibility. Even maybe Haley Deegan was a potential possibility. Matt DiBenedetto was a possibility maybe. There's drivers who were possibilities, and they lost big sponsorship and funding when Eric Almirola left this year and Kevin Harvick left this year. They lost massive sponsorships and massive funding this year. And that's why I think these rumors about SHR potentially switching over and leaving Ford, I think are very true. Now, how likely do I think they leave Ford? I think it's probably 95 to 100%. The fact that Jordan Bianchi, who's usually one of the most credible journalists out there, he's basically saying this, tells me they're probably more likely going to be leaving Ford at the end of this year and at the end of this season. How successful will they be with whatever manufacturer they go to? I think they have a chance to be successful. But where do they go? If you want my opinion, I think for 2025, they're going back to Chevrolet. And I think Junior Motorsports could be involved in some sort of capacity and bring their team up. But also, I think there's a potential possibility they go to Toyota, and that's a possibility as well. And even if Honda comes in, they can switch over there in 2026. But right now, I think they're leaving Ford, and they're going back to Chevrolet in the 2025 season. This will be a story to follow and watch for as we progress through this offseason. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Kurt Busch. Now, I talked about this on the channel early this week, but I want to give a little more talk about this. So, last weekend during the Vegas weekend, I think it was Friday during the Craftsman Truck Series race, Kurt Busch put out potentially a little bit of a teaser of a potential return to the sport. Well, Kurt Busch said, "Today is my day." Refired, not rehired. I think rehired or refired, basically not retired. Kurt Busch is potentially indicating here that he could be returning in some sort of capacity, whether it's driving behind the wheel or basically getting into the booth, which we'll get into here in just a little bit. Kurt Busch has not raced in NASCAR since 2022 when he's basically qualifying for the race at Pocono in the 45 car for 23XI Racing. And Kurt Busch, unfortunately, had a really bad wreck. He suffered concussion-like symptoms and had been trying to get back in the sport in 2023. But he eventually announced during Daytona week about a year ago that about 6-7 months ago, that he would be retiring from the sport at the time. But he basically had been hoping to get back into racing in some sort of form or capacity and maybe another form. But he wasn't planning on returning to NASCAR on a full-time basis. And as of then, had basically announced retirement from the sport, which for a lot of fans at the time, we were very, very sad about it because I feel like Kurt Busch had a lot of unfinished business and deserved to at least come back for maybe a one-off. But now you have him kind of coming on here and teasing a possible and a potential return to the sport. Now, why could Kurt Busch make a return? Well, there's two potential possibilities. Number one, 23XI Racing. About a week ago, Steve Auletta was on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio. I think it was on Thursday or Friday last week. Steve Auletta was on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio and had indicated that they were planning to run a third car once again in 2024. And the details at the time had not been known. Kurt Busch could potentially be that candidate driver that they're looking at. I know that some people brought up Kamui Kobayashi, which he certainly is a potential possibility and a potential shout to get behind the wheel circuit of the Americas, which is where Kurt Busch could drive, by the way. And there's also other drivers like, I think, Brendan Hartley been mentioned. I've even seen Carl Edwards mentioned at one point by some people, even though he's probably not going to be the driver. But I would imagine that Kurt Busch's name hadn't brought up in the conversations as a potential possibility. And then you think about Tricon. I talked about Trion Garage. That team has been indicating they've got a pretty big announcement that you're going to really like, and someone who I think is going to be really enjoyable to get behind the wheel. Maybe Kurt Busch is that driver, and kind of looking at the photo a little bit, it did look like Kurt Busch, though I'm not going to say it is Kurt Busch. So maybe he could go to Trion Garage. As for Kurt Busch, though, I would love to see Kurt Busch come back to the sport. Kurt Busch, in my opinion, and come back at least just for a one-off to close out his career. Kurt Busch, in my opinion, deserves a one-off return. He's a very, very good driver who always got the best out of equipment, and whatever team he drove for in the sport, he went out to win races and contend for championships. He won championship with Roush. He won races with Roush. He won races with Chip Ganassi Racing. He won races with 23XI Racing. He almost won races with Phoenix. He almost won races with Furniture Row. He won races with SHR. Every organization that Kurt Busch drove for, and Penske, of course, every organization that Kurt Busch generally drove for in the sport. He always got the best out of equipment and was able to go out there and contend for victories and brought the best out of him. And he's been a big reason why 2311 Racing has been generally on the rise in recent years, because he's basically been the competition advisor at that team and has been really helping the team out in a major and massive way. And it has led to 2311 Racing having a ton of really awesome and great success. And I think that for him to come out back potentially make a return to the sport, I think would be really, really phenomenal. Now, do I think Kurt Busch is absolutely going to return? I don't know at this point. I don't know exactly for sure if he's going to return or not. But I think the fact that he's been teasing it, this is the first time he's teased it in a very long time, this could mean he can return at least as a driver. But what about maybe not as a driver, but as a broadcaster? We do know that Kurt Busch has commentated races before for NBC and also for Fox. And we know that Kurt Busch is someone that probably Amazon is looking at. We know that Dillon Jr. is going to be joining the Amazon and the TNT booth. And I think Kurt Busch, if he was to join the TNT and Amazon booth, or maybe go to the Xfinity booth and work with the CW, I think that'd be really cool too. So maybe Kurt Busch isn't returning as a driver. Maybe he's going to return to NASCAR as a commentator and work with one of these TV networks. Because I think if Kurt Busch went to one of the TV networks, I think he would do it solid in a very, very good job and be very good in the broadcast booth. It would be really interesting to see what Kurt Busch is doing. Maybe he's also going to work as a higher up and take an ownership role in 2311 Racing. I think it'd be cool for him to take over an ownership role in the series. But nonetheless, I think it's interesting to see that Kurt Busch is interested in potentially making a return in some sort of form or some sort of capacity. It's going to be fun to watch and see what happens, and speculation is going to be rampant in the coming days because, again, it was Vegas weekend. Something Kurt Busch could make a return. Maybe it's for Bristol. Who knows at this point? But nonetheless, it's going to be very fun to watch and see what happens if Kurt Busch does return. Because I think if Kurt Busch was a return to the sport, I think he'd be very successful. I hope he does come back. We'll have to wait and see, though, if he truly does make a return to NASCAR. So, that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and ask for my Patreon as well. Listeners involved with that, and comment your thoughts below on today's video. Do you think Kurt Busch is actually going to come back or not in some sort of capacity, whether it's working in the commentary booth or working as a driver? Let me your thoughts in the comments below. And do you think Stewart-Haas Racing is going to Chevy or not? Let me your thoughts in the comments below. I got a ton of great content dropping over the course of the next couple days. I might have a second video dropping later today. You never know if any major news breaks. Tomorrow, we're going to have the Xfinity Series review and also the poll video. And if SVG has a great run, we'll talk about that as well. And then on Sunday, we'll have the starting lineup video for the Cup Series race at Phoenix and then the NASCAR review of Phoenix. And there should be another news video dropping on Monday morning. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. And I'll see you guys next time for more awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.